Okay, Professor Tootle, welcome.
Good to be here.
Yeah, we've taken a month or two off this spring for a variety of reasons, just meetings, conflicts, appointments, end of graduation, that kind of stuff. So we might be a little bit rusty, correct or no?
Well, yeah, it's not like we were a bunch of pros anyway. So,
Yeah, fair enough.
uh,
Fair enough. So here's the big picture on today's conversation, Professor. I'm going to jump right in. I don't even want to delay. It's not just me. There's been a couple major articles written on it, and I don't know if they're, periodicals or magazines or even if they're people of any credibility. But there's also been a couple of my very smart friends, and I have been talking about a little bit of dread or a possibility of discontent or worse, riots or serious problems this summer. And I don't think you have to be brilliant to forecast that. It's common sense. We're spending $40 billion in Ukraine, and there's still poor people in America. And God, there was a shooting in Buffalo, predominantly black. And then, oh my God, we shot up another damn school again and down in Texas. And the Supreme Court's going to outlaw abortion for 50 years, 5 decades. I know a lot of women are really upset about this, and there's probably a lot of people that are, well, good. But I mean, it doesn't take brain surgery to realize there's a lot of conflict going on right now. Still COVID's flying out there, and now we have monkeypox. For God's sakes, what the hell's going on, Professor? Are things really doom and gloom out there, or is that just me and some weird friends thinking that there's some bad stuff on the horizon?
yes and no. Uh,
Good. Give your overview of where we are as a country.
we have a deep cultural problem, and we don't seem to have any sign that we're doing the things that we need to do to fix these cultural problems.
Okay,
Um,
so I'm going to break it down. We have a deep cultural problem, which is,
well, I think boy, that's a big question. If I were to summarize all of it, it's sort of, I think we expect politics to do too much, and especially we expect national politics to do too much. And we have been telling ourselves for now 90 years that that national politics can uh, can do things that it really can't do, and because of that, it leads people to channel their discontent in a specific way that's going to lead to bigger and more profound problems, while at the same time never addressing the underlying issues that are making these problems in society worse. And so, because of that, I think that all of the discontent that you're detecting is going to get worse. While at the same time, I try to, so that's the yes part of the answer where I agree with you.
right?
The no part of the answer is that part of what's wrong in our society is that we have a hard time putting events into perspective, and so it will appear to, it will be bad, but it will also appear to be worse.
Okay, there's lots of material for me to ask questions on that, and for other folks to join in here in a little bit. Let me drill down on one. I don't even know how to start this. It's so brutal. School kids getting assassinated, murdered in their classroom is just so abhorrent for everybody. I don't know anybody that wouldn't just be completely aghast at that. And so you had me read you're a historian. This isn't just two guys talking. There could be 330 million of these podcasts. Supposedly, your 2 or 3 degrees I guess 3 degrees have some relevance to gaining knowledge or perspective or wisdom. I know lots of guys or gals I could interview, and we all, heck, you see me on Facebook, I'll rant with the best of them. But you have some talent in providing some context, historical context, that may help guide us in today's world. So let me prove that in a way this is too soon. If it was another week or a month or a year, I think it would be more relevant. This is too soon. But you have suggested that I read a book, a biography, I think it's called, of Coolidge. And I haven't made my way through it. But one of the very first parts of that was there was a national disaster. And they said, well, do you want to go to it? And the answer is no, I'm not going. And why? Well, because it's not a national issue. Well, sure, there's a lot of people talking about it. And he goes, but it's not a national problem. And maybe you can give that if you remember what it was. Mm-hmm. The only reason I bring that up is I have kids. I went to schools. I think we need to do something different with school violence and violence in general, the wanton taking of an innocent life. Something's broken in America, and we'll talk about scale. But I do think something's broken, and we can't just sit there with our arms thrown up. I think we should do something. But my something is not Governor Abbott talking at the press conference with all that doesn't actually interest me, and it doesn't interest me about President Biden either. I don't know what either of them have to do with a local rural school district and their response. And it's a really important issue, but those are the wrong two people to be talking. You should be talking to the PTO president and the principal and the sheriff and the city municipal police officers. Those are the folks that we should be expressing empathy to. But maybe I'm wrong. Will you give me a reaction to school shootings and who we should be paying attention to and how we should be helping?
Well, everybody has a role to play, and everyone is entitled to their reactions. But so on one hand, I don't think it's appropriate to say that national leaders or state leaders don't have any role to play and
Sure.
have a constructive role to play in handling a tragedy. I think the problem becomes when two problems. When we expect the national leader to fix a local problem, and also when our feelings turn inappropriate. When, and this is a question for mental health professionals can answer what this is like for the individual. I've only studied it in trying to get a handle on what's been going on in America for the past 40 years. So for me as a historian, I sometimes feel like I have to read works from outside of history in order to understand, especially things that are happening in contemporary America. And one of the things that is clear when you get to the part where you said, we do have a problem. We do have a problem. And even adjusted for scale, we have a problem. Mm-hmm. And it is absolutely clear that these national social trends are having an effect on how people live their lives and how we process problems. So, these cultural issues will manifest themselves differently among different populations. A 13-year-old female is going to manifest the problem in one way. A 15-year-old male in a different way. Where they live will matter, but it will be a combination of local, intimate, and individual issues that come together that then we are able to see as part of a national trend. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
Not quite. It gives context, but let me try to hone it in this way. I originally titled this conversation "A Conservative's View of Problems in America Right Now," and I changed it because sure, you're a conservative and so am I, but I'm not sure that looking at it from a conservative liberal lens is the right way to look at all these things, whether it's the pandemic or whether it's the racial tensions or whether it's war in Ukraine. Yeah, sure, there are lenses that you can put on with a conservative or liberal and other lenses, but I'm not sure that's actually even the right way to do it.
Well, let me put it this way. I think that both conservatives and liberals have a role to play in making society better, and both are essential. I think that what liberals could do to make the world a better place right now, without changing their worldview, would be to look at their local situations and advocate on behalf of small groups of people who need help in their communities. But
isn't that the conservative viewpoint? Why would you ask me liberals to take a conservative worldview on that?
well, I think one of the because I think conservatives have a different role to play, and I'm thinking of at putting both the liberal and the conservative in their local context. So I think that one of the things that liberals could do is to advocate on behalf of groups of people and doing their best to connect local groups of people to services that need them, and try to make things better at the kind of local level. But I think liberals could do a really good job of expressing empathy and amplifying voices that require advocacy at the local level. I think liberals could use their sort of natural talents and inclinations to make their communities better in that regard. I think one of the things that conservatives could do is remind, and I'd say at the sort of hyper local level, is remind people of what politics can't do. And say, we, in many cases, we can't wait on the government to fix this problem. When you see a problem, fix it. And anyone who's a teacher, I'm a teacher and I know a lot of teachers. Every teacher I know has prevented multiple suicides. You can't talk to a teacher who's been in the classroom for 25 years who doesn't have between 3 and 6 stories of a time when someone was going to kill themselves and you were there to stop it.
And you don't mean physically, you mean emotionally, intellectually helping that person through their difficult time. You don't mean physically stopping it.
In some cases, it's physical. You were there right before. In some cases, it will be, I was planning to do it tonight, and if I hadn't run into you, right, I would have done it. In almost every case, the only thing that will fix any social problem is the fabric of a community coming together. And I was thinking about what is the difference between me and someone who had problems that manifested those problems in more antisocial ways. And when I went through, I think Lorraine Anderson needs to mute.
Hold on, I got her. Go ahead, keep going.
Yeah. But I was thinking about, when I was young, and went through any kind of difficulties as a teenager with, a lot of testosterone running through me. And this is another thing that is a difference between young men and young women, is that young men tend to act out and young women tend to punish themselves. So that's why these actions are often taken by young men. And we are increasingly doing things in our culture to infantilize and change how our youth grow up. So 10 years ago, they said, that essentially like an 18-year-old in the year 2015 was essentially what a 15-year-old was 10 years before that. And now in the year 2022, an 18-year-old is a 13-year-old.
If there's studies on that, Professor, I think that would be nice to link to this later.
Well, it's in this book, The Coddling of the American Mind. This is a book that describes a lot of the, I think Jonathan Haidt has a new book out that will be coming out this summer just on this issue. So he's expanding what is a chapter in that book on the coddling of the American mind into a full-length book. And I think the new book is about how social media and technology has, changed young minds over the past 20 years. So what do you do when you have essentially a larger number of young people who are emotionally younger, still having the biology of a male, and all of the attendant issues that come with the chemicals that run through their bodies as they develop. And the number of institutions that young man belongs to has now dropped below zero. If you compare this to somebody like me, I would have had, let's set aside family, extended family, neighbors, friends, parents, coaches. I was in DeMolay, another, it's kind of like the Masonic Lodge. I was in when I was in high school. Yeah, I got a 1 thumbs up. Yeah, for, and DeMolay is nothing but a character shaping institution for young men. And this is something that hardly exists anymore, and at every stage when I could have, gone wrong, there was always this fabric of people who cared about me and would have stopped me from feeling like I was in despair. Now, having feelings is normal. It's when we dwell upon them and believe that our feelings are real and we can't stop ourselves from spiraling despair, that's when we begin harming ourselves and others. And you need other people in order to prevent that kind of behavior. And now the average young man has no friends. I don't know if that, it almost seems unreal to anyone who is older to know that the number of friends that a young man has been dropping by half every 10 years, to the point where now the average young person has no friends.
Yeah, and isn't the national average, or at least a decade ago when I last looked at this, wasn't it like the average American has 1.6 friends?
Yeah.
We have very few friends as a society.
and you throw in 2 years of isolation because of a pandemic, but the trend line, the larger trend lines have also been terrible going back 30 years. So this is a long-term 30 or 40-year problem that has just had gasoline poured on top of it because of the pandemic. But we have some things that are part of society. I mean, we say this, we use this analogy when we talk about Trump versus Obama, or liberals versus or the left versus the right. One of these things is a cancer and the other one is a heart attack. And we have a long-term cancer that we aren't dealing with. And then we have a short-term heart attack that
I guess to my point of today's conversation and upcoming this summer is we have a potential series of heart attacks that are going on. So we've got a bunch of stuff that's all accumulating right together that could create a powder keg in America for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
So, Professor, we've only talked, and not even in depth, of one issue, which is what happened in Texas. I do want to put a point in on that. After I was a county commissioner when Columbine happened in Colorado, and spent a full decade plus working on community group, religion and school officials and sheriffs and mental health and business leaders all together once a month for over a decade, and working with Dale Elliott, the Center for Prevention of Violence, and they study this, so what causes violence. And what you were alluding to, and maybe Jonathan Haidt's writing on it or similar things, is that lots of good folks that have a good life have protective factors built around them, church and family and faith and service organizations and neighbors. And the risk factors aren't quite as much. There's drugs and sure there's some violence, but it's not just like in their face every day. And the folks that really struggle have these huge risk factors. Their parents use drugs, or their next door neighbor's a drug dealer, and there's violence in their neighborhood, and have very few protective factors. Well, shocking that some people go bad easier, and other people, even when they are bad, have all these protective factors that rope them back in. I think that's a worthwhile umbrella conversation for us to have, even in these other topics. But I do want to move on, unless you have something else to tell us about Texas and what we should be doing about it in a historical way.
Well, I'll say this. It's important to feel your feelings, but if you want to then have more constructive conversations, I would say, turning back to this coddling of the American mind, one of the things I've noticed about a lot of the commentary, and this will probably relate to every issue, which is in the appendix of this book, it lists the categories of distorted automatic thoughts, which are when something bad happens to us, these are the automatic thoughts that we have: mind reading, fortune telling, catastrophizing, labeling, discounting positives, negative filtering, overgeneralizing, dichotomous thinking, shoulds, personalizing, blaming, unfair comparison, regret orientation, what ifs, emotional reasoning, the inability to disconfirm, and a judgment focus. And then when you look at those issues, you realize, well, this is what we all do. When we're trying to cope with some sort of massive tragedy, no matter what it is, this is what our brain automatically does. And what social media does is it takes that and it puts it out there immediately and makes it seem permanent. And then these algorithms will, spin these things out. And so what we're getting and what is being encouraged are things that are normal feelings that once expressed, someone who is mentally healthy reconciles these feelings with reality. But what social media does is it takes these things and spirals them up. Mm-hmm. And when we have a political system based on expecting our national government to solve these problems, it's like between social media and the nationalization of politics, it's just this recipe for driving a society into mental unhealthiness.
Okay. That's an excellent summation of things that, again, an umbrella that we should consider in all these different issues. Team, we only have 5 more minutes of my facilitated session. As you can see that I'm not facilitating very well. That's the rustiness of us not getting together. So now I just see 4 minutes left. So Professor, I'm going to try to do a round, lightning round on myself and you. On just, instead of the 10 things I put in the description of this, maybe a couple more. The shooting in Buffalo. I can assure you that I know real friends, not some acquaintance on Facebook, but real friends, Black friends, who are distraught, who are truly thinking that a Black life in America doesn't matter as much as a white life in America. And the Buffalo, they're truly distraught over the series of events of the last few years. And we've done several items on this historically on race relations and slavery. And I mean, people can go back to our videos and see this. But absent the Texas murder of these school kids and teachers, this would have been a broader topic that you and I would have on talking about Buffalo and related issues of race relations in America. I'd like you to at least give a minute on your historical perspectives on what we should be doing differently or where we're at that we already haven't addressed. Is there a difference?
Well, racism is another species of mental illness. It is a way that someone commits their life to a lie and then acts upon that lie. And in that sense, it's similar, because in both cases, what we're dealing with is what happens to a society when you take someone and you've told them a bad story. And in the case of the Buffalo shooter, this is someone who had been given a story or an explanation that they then acted upon. And that's what racism is. In many ways, it's the same as what motivates a school shooter in Texas. It's just a different lie that they're acting upon.
Is there something, though, that you and I and folks like us, whatever we're like, Americans, I mean, is there something that we humans can be doing, though, to have more empathy or approach race relations in a different way? I mean, there is a concerted effort of some racism, and I hope it's very small, but I have no idea. But it seems like there's something amiss in America. Can't we be doing something? I mean, when we go back to the Civil War, well, there was a big something there. And then you can go to the 1960s and civil rights legislation. There's a big something there. Is there something we can be doing from your historical perspective that's different than our current model?
When I first started having kids, my older sister had 4 kids, and now she's got 7 grandkids. And the best piece of advice that I received on parenting was from her. And she said, parent the child that you have. You've got friends who are hurting because of racism. You know these people. You know better than I do how to give them what they need. Give them what they need. And show them all the love that you can. Love the people in your life in the best way you know how, which that is what Americans should be doing. There is no political formula. This is not a problem, and it's a problem that we think that this is a problem that politics can solve. It's a misunderstanding of what politics can do. Politics is a necessary but not sufficient condition. All politics can do is translate the culture of a people. And if you have a bad culture, it's not a condemnation of freedom when the actions of a bad culture are translated into activities, and that's why we always try to emphasize the concept of pluralism in these webcasts that we do, but also a fundamental understanding of just what Benjamin Franklin said when they asked, like, what kind of government? A republic, if you can keep it. That means that we can set up the structures for people to live peaceful lives, but it's up to the people who live to create the good culture and have those things translated into how you actually live your life. Too often, I think that we believe that if we get this sense that the government will take care of this thing, and we are then morally absolved. I don't have to. It's okay if I'm if I look out for the interests of my family and sell out my own political beliefs, because I'm still a good person because I vote for the Democratic Party and I give money to X, Y, and Z, candidates for office, and I donate to these organizations, so therefore I am absolved. But there was an old book by Paul Johnson that called The Intellectuals, really old book, but it was about all these people who had utopian schemes for humanity. And he pointed out the simple fact that all of them were mean to their own families. They all had these schemes about how to fix society as a whole, and none of them knew how to be a good person,
individually within their own lives.
Individually. And it's not on accident that people who come up with utopian schemes who promise to solve these problems, I mean, this is the root of all evil, the belief that these problems are solvable. We can't solve these problems because they're rooted in the human heart. Making something that's already illegal more illegal might make us feel good about ourselves, but making something that's illegal more illegal is not going to solve the problem. And it's not even going to make these problems better.
Okay, Professor, that could be another whole half hour just on that point alone, because I think we'd have lots of our liberal friends say BS, do what Australia did, ban automatic weapons, and both of those last two issues we've been spending a half an hour on would dramatically go down. And yes, you've got to confiscate them or buy them or do something, but BS, Americans have a violence problem, and other countries have had it and solved it. Anyway, I'm nervous by throwing that out because it could be an hour. I guess I should give you a 15-second retort to that.
Well, America has a gun violence problem because our violence problem comes out in the tools that are available in our society. Every other one of these cultures has a different violence problem. So playing the game of whack-a-mole with the tools does not help the underlying issue of violence in a society.
Cool. That's enough for people to hang their hat on the respective arguments. Now, I do want to get to Ben and Bart and Lorraine and Bill, but please, friends, forgive me for a second because I didn't get to 3/4 of the agenda. So, Professor, this is going to be a stretch. Just try to realize that this is an hour stretch. I'm going to ask in 1 minute with a 3-minute response, and we'll open it up. Ready?
Okay.
So we've got the normal tensions of an election cycle. Governors and senators all across America in midterm elections. And that creates some angst among populations because of each side tries to make the other look in their most unfavorable light. And then people have defensive mechanisms and we fight each other. So that's one. Two, We've got a Supreme Court ruling that looks like it's going to overturn Roe v. Wade of a 50-year decision that's withheld 50 years of scrutiny. 3, we have got the racial strife, the school shootings, but that we've already talked about those. But we've got a war in Europe that could get to a world war if we're not all aware. But we're spending $40 billion there, which, by the way, I support. But we're spending $40 billion there with lots of problems in our own country, in our own communities, in our own states that need solving. Poor people and bridges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then we've also got insurrection hearings from the last election, not even just the next one. We're going to have primetime viewing of people talking about something that's going to get people really riled up. All of this and more, inflation and the price cost of gas, et cetera, leads to this having a chance of being a really brutal summer in America. It could be really ugly. And so is this an ugly period in America, or no, John, you're being melodramatic. I understand your points, but it's all going to be fine. This is a fine summer, John. Enjoy life, go on a trip, which I am doing. But talk to us about historically perspective. Is this a dangerous time in America? And if so, what should we be doing about it? If not, that's an easy answer. Professor, a couple minutes to response.
It reminds me of a couple of different eras. I mean, the 1970s, certainly, the 1920s and 30s, and then the 1850s, and in some ways the 1890s. So in a way, we have been dealing with many of these issues at other times in our history, but we have some new problems that are, and the most important of these is probably that we aren't looking to the past enough in our problem solving. I can't tell you how often I have seen people say we should not be listening to a bunch of white people wearing knee breeches from the 1700s, in order to solve these problems. There is an overemphasis on those feelings that I listed earlier. Again, nothing wrong with them as they come to you. But there's a problem when you say, no, what we need to do is we must transform society according to my feelings. And so, yes, this is a dangerous time. Yes, there are precedents, and yes, there are solutions, but it means that we have to look at these precedents. We can't simply ignore them and pretend like, I don't know what all of the solutions are, but I know that arrogance is not one of the solutions, and when people lean on that, it's that is a recipe, because I know that whatever our problems are in society, that we're not going to solve them through a combination of arrogance and ignorance.
Okay, let's leave it for that and see if any of this conversation has enticed Lorraine, Bart, Ben, or Bill to jump in with their questions, concerns, commentary. We've got a good 20-25 minutes to go, so jump in. Take yourself off mic and oh, come on, somebody's got a question, right? You're up.
So this is a great discussion. It's timely for me. I just had breakfast with a neighbor. John, I described who I'm talking about. Politically, we're extremely divided, but we're good friends, love each other. It's an interesting relationship. But on the division, he is absolutely convinced that our election integrity is completely and totally compromised in the United States. And so, when we were talking about politics in terms of, obviously, Biden's approval rating is way down, Democrats' approval rating is way down. Everything points to a Democratic, if not a sweep, a Republican, if not a sweep, a major gain in this fall's elections and perhaps beyond. But he feels like, no, the Democrats are going to figure out a way to win. They're going to steal the elections. And so it's still going to be the Democrats in charge. Absolutely convinced of that. And I'm thinking of your comments, Stephen, about our institutions are, bringing everything down to a local level. Why aren't our election officials in front of our Rotary clubs and, churches and, other institutions, society, civic groups? Why, is the solution importantly a significant part of just helping people understand what our own environment is in terms of election integrity, and starting there? Should there be more advocacy? Let me harken back to one formative experience in my life back in Omaha in the 1970s, when we had court-ordered busing imposed on the community. And I was really active in a group whose singular mission was to prevent violence of the type that happened in Louisville and Boston in that era. And we had a very successful outcome, but it was totally dependent on these institutions of Rotary clubs and optimists. And we went and we spoke and we had newsletters and we went to churches and we went to political meetings. We just hit all of the institutions that people belonged to and trusted in their own life in order to share not an argument that you should be pro or con, but an argument that we don't want violence in front of the buses that are going to roll in September. So I guess the question in all of that is, these societal institutions that we all grew up with, and your comment, Stephen, about use and having family, extended family, Boy Scouts, DMOAs, etc., if that just makes all of this harder.
Well, certainly isolated life does. But I would say, I was thinking about your friend, and I have friends who we disagree with on most things political, but I have had this experience now. I've got a few gray hairs where somebody will be rather cynical about some institution, like say election integrity. And I'll say, well, is this something that is really important to you? And they'll say, yes, absolutely. This is important to me. So you're a patriotic person. Yes, I love this country. And you would do anything to save it. Yes. All right. And you believe that election integrity is that big of a problem? Yes, I do. So let's go volunteer to be election monitors. And then you say, well, it's kind of up to you. Like I'm either A, you're lying and this isn't that big of a deal to you, or B, I'm willing to see how it's done at the local level. And what will often happen is not that the person becomes less cynical, but you become cynical about different things. Meaning what you find out is that it's not so much that there's some kind of an evil mastermind. It's that this person doesn't care. This person just wants a paycheck. This person's trying not to get fired. That what you encounter are a bunch of normal people with all the sins and flaws that normal people have. But that person goes from being someone who believes a conspiracy theory about stealing elections to being the person who explains to their friends, no, look, you know me, I was an election monitor. And the way that you're describing these events, that's not how it works. That's not how it happens. you know.
I got you, Jake. You're fine. Keep going, Professor.
Yeah, no, I was done, but you know, that's how I would sort of handle, and how I have in the past handled it. And what you end up with is a bunch of friends who are all, you know, working on different city committees, and they're all involved in civic life, and they become the kind of people who are like ambassadors for civic life, rather than people who sit at home and believe the worst about their fellow man. Now, I will say, getting involved in politics, as I said, it doesn't make you think that everyone is a hero. That is, I think Bart would be the first to attest to this, that, and you probably, John, you've had enough experiences like this too, where, you know, some of them are really dumb. Some of them are bad people with horrible motives, you know,
Just self-centered egotists.
Yeah. But when somebody comes along and says, oh, this is how it works, you go, oh, well, no, I could see it happening this way, but it wouldn't happen that way, because that's not how this system works. In other words, but you have to have that sort of level of involvement. But it has to happen on an individual basis too.
Yeah, and Professor, I thought President Bush's comment when he first said it was really dumb, the 1,000 points of light. But over the decades now, I've come to appreciate that more and more and more. I just think, Bill, we have a mutual friend that just thought the same thing about elections in Douglas County, in this instance, not my county, but Douglas County. And I said, you just got to go volunteer or be the paid person. You don't have to be a volunteer. You can actually go and get paid. We hire hundreds of people to actually get paid as a temporary employee. And that person did. And that person doesn't have that same opinion anymore because they're in the system. Anyway, I hope that helped, Bill, or do you have a follow-up?
Well, I love that suggestion. I guess in terms of a multiplier effect, I still feel like, you know, our civic groupings are becoming more and more homogenous and less diverse, and it makes it more difficult to, you know, go to organizations and try to open eyes on a group basis. So that, you know, scaling this is daunting to me. But
well, I'm so glad you said that, because I think one of the most important lessons is that to learn that we can't scale this.
yeah.
You know, you're because that's what everybody tries to do. We say, oh, this is a great program, it works so well here, you know, how do we scale it? And the answer is you can't, because this is what we always try to do. How do you treat your children? You know, now scale it. You know, like it can't, you know, there will never be any two little boys that I love as much as my sons. And so that's why I mean, like, trying to figure out how to put yourself in the proper perspective with the national news is one of the reasons why I went back to getting a physical newspaper, is so that I would not be encountering this online world so often, that I could take a step back and begin to put the news in its proper perspective. And I'm not saying bury your head in the sand. I certainly, you know, by all means, read newspapers, read books, you know, read history books, like, engage in your civic life. But one of my old professors used to, who actually studied Soviet history, he would get frustrated because he would be talking about something having to do with the Soviet Union or Russia, and then inevitably the Americanist would raise their hand and say, like, what was the American role in doing this? And he stopped and he was like, every sparrow that falls from the sky is not the problem of the American people. You know, we didn't cause everything. And at the same token, like, you know, Abraham Lincoln has this line about not bothering about the oyster laws of New England. Like, there's a certain point where what we want is we want we want to have our feelings, we want to engage in sympathy, but at the same time, you cannot. We have the ability to find out about horrible atrocities happening to tens of millions of people every day. And if we decided that that was reality, then all of our social media aggregators, our Google News, our Apple News feed, our Facebook feed, our Twitter feed, our Instagram feed, every time you are connected to the internet, you would be fed more of it. And the human brain cannot take on the burden of every act of evil that takes place around the world. You would do nothing but you would engage in all of this unhealthy mental activity if you were to do so.
I have a good friend who once told me, Bill, he's a true globalist, internationalist. He said, Bill, somehow in all the world, only the United States seems to have citizens who believe that there's a solution to every problem. But on scaling, thank you for saying that. Point well taken. I appreciate that.
Cool. So with your permission, let me jump in again. Mayor Anderson, you're not on video, which is fine, but your lifelong service to our state in a variety of roles. Let me not put you on the spot, but you and I have agreed on a couple major public policy issues in the last decade, really controversial. Thank you for doing so, by the way, because we were right. But I've also noticed that you're getting more frustrated and more angry at a variety of things. And it could be part of our Republican past, but it's not necessarily just Republicans. You're expressing some real angst and frustration in society right now. I assume you know that. At least that's what I'm picking up from you on the internet. Not to put you on the spot, but you have been one of the best states people that Colorado have ever produced. Thank you for all your elected positions. Do you have a question or a comment for Professor Tootle? If somebody watches this video at some point in the future, they may be able to have an aha moment, either from your wisdom or the professor's. If so, please take yourself off mute.
Okay, how's that?
You're good.
Okay. I think that all of the things that I have worked for my whole life are being crushed. Still not over the horror of people killing little children. I just can't express how awful that is. I also am concerned that our freedoms, and perhaps I mean that the freedom of women to live their lives according to their wishes or their family's wishes is being attacked by our state governments and of course now the Supreme Court. So it's sort of crushing for me to find that, number one, women are still second-class citizens, and number two, gosh, thoughts and prayers for killing little children in schools. And I hate to be way. It's really not good for anybody to be this concerned about that, but I just can't get over that it's all right to kill children in school in our country, and it's okay if states take away women's rights. The Black male had voting rights in this country before women ever did. And so now we're putting women back as second-class citizens. And I frankly don't think we're going to go back, but that's where I am right now. And it's not been very pleasant.
So thank you, Mayor. She articulately described what I'm getting from a lot of my friends, Professor, which is the reason I wanted to do the show and the way I'm doing this show, is to express this angst that is deep-seated and real. And you've already alluded to several other periods in U.S. history that were deep-seated and real, one with dramatic consequences and the others we somehow figured it out. Do you have a response for Mayor Anderson?
Only that to say that we're all entitled to feel our feelings, and that what you choose to do with them is hopefully what informs the political process. That, you know, we're here to decide in Federalist One the important question, which is, are we forever destined to be governed by accident and force, or whether or not we can govern ourselves from thought and reflection? But our system is designed to not process feelings. It's designed to process thoughts and reflections. So I would say don't rush your way through feeling the entirely appropriate feelings you have on any national issue. But the question needs to turn to, at some point, okay, I have felt these feelings. I have given them their just desserts, and the question then becomes, now looking back on my feelings, was I engaging in mind reading, assuming that I knew what other people were thinking about the same issue? Was I engaging in fortune telling? Was I predicting the future negatively? Was I catastrophizing? Did I believe that what had happened would be so awful and unbearable that I wouldn't be able to stand it? Was I engaging in labeling? Was I assigning global negative traits to myself and to others? Was I discounting positives? In other words, there's nothing wrong with we're supposed to feel horrible when horrible things happen. And so I don't want to jump to the next stage, but just have in the back of our minds that when we encounter something as a tragedy, that what we must do is engage in, eventually, don't rush it, but eventually engage in the next step, which is to reconcile to begin trying to put our feelings into perspective and reconcile our feelings with reality.
Follow-up question, Lorraine, or are you comfortable with that for now? You're off mute. Are you okay for now?
I'm okay for now.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And again, your service is to be emulated. And I feel your pain. I just want you to know, I don't think I've told you that. I see it. So Professor, to your comment, one of my main goals for my career has been to take people's feelings to make sure we don't resort to the fist or the knife or the gun, mob violence. And I have lots of fear going on right now across the spectrum that people are willing to take situations into their own hands and try to execute their will through force rather than through their words. And it's, again, across the spectrum that my eyebrows are way up. And I think all rational people need to do our job by pulling it back into the systems, even though they're broken, back into the. Please.
Oh, no, that what you said is exactly the right point, which is that that's why it is so dangerous that people are saying that the system is broken. There's no point and we need to reject it. And because that is when people say, well, I've just been told my whole life that the system is broken. And therefore, there's no point in putting my effort into it. I must look to these other avenues of somebody who will, I want my emotions to be translated into immediate action because I believe that my immediate actions are the only thing that can make this better. You're talking about somebody who has gone from believing in the system to someone who is a revolutionary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've seen it in protests, in riots last summer, and we saw it on January 6th with riots. So both sides of the spectrum who are taking their thoughts out into violence.
Well, that's why I even, I started by rejecting left and right, but I think it's to the point where I don't even think it is useful to describe these things as being different from one another. I don't see any difference. It is a totalitarian mindset that has given up on the system, and it is a rejection of rule of law. It's a rejection of pluralism. And I mean, there are countless, parodies of this from Saturday Night Live to TikTok about how the so-called left and the so-called right are identical. And I don't even know if I will refer to, I've always been so specific with my definitions of the left and the right, but I think we're now giving people too much credit by even referring to them as part of the left or the right, because people who now say that they're of the left, they have nothing in common with the left of the past. And even people of the right will often have absolutely nothing in common. What we're really dealing with in both cases are people who are enemies of the peaceful negotiation of social problems, and who are enemies of rule of law. And they want their feelings translated into immediate action. And they have a single issue. It doesn't matter what that single issue is, that they believed every other part of society needs to be reconciled to their single issue without ever considering what the consequence of that will be. And I don't care if that issue is Roe versus Wade or putting Donald Trump back into office, but these people have no differences between them. They are people who want something and believe that what politics is there to do is to achieve a specific single result, rather than balance the political rights of everyone in society.
Yeah, thanks for that response, Professor. And Lorraine, forgive me for paying so much attention to you. I'm just such a big admirer. A plea to you, in addition to all your political service to our state, communities, and state, the other thing you've done is, well, you have two other major things you've done is you've been a wonderful family person, and that is self-evident for anyone who knows you. But also you're a problem solver in business. You and your husband had a successful business for decades. And I think most of us need to look back to those kind of things as, are we caring for our family, and are we solving problems that people are willing to pay us money for to accomplish the goal? And your business perspective has been so wise. Please don't be too disillusioned. I hear you, but please, there's lots of good stuff going on in the world, and you're a shining example of all three of those: family, business, and public service. Bart, you've had yourself off mute. We're almost out of time, but I want you and Jake to have a quick question and response if you'd like.
Okay. Mine, I guess, is more of a statement than a question, because I I think that, I appreciate the fact that it might look like we have a whole lot of conflict and strife in our society. And I think we do in some ways. I think what you got to realize, though, is the system itself is only as broken as we allow it to become. And I've got two examples for the group to throw out there. And John, you're probably not even aware of this, but about 3 months ago, our little kind of umbrella neighborhood organization around the city was sued.
I didn't.
Yeah, and it's really weird because I got a phone call kind of in the middle of the night from the current chair of this organization. And this is a kind of community organization that consists of homeowners associations, and they primarily make comments on land use cases. And I guess they had made a comment on a land use case that someone didn't like. And this person went out and hired a lawyer who sued them. Well, she called me and said, Bart, I think we have a problem here. And I know you're a lawyer. I think I'm getting to the point where I need a lawyer. And I asked her, well, what's going on here? And she said, well, there's this lawsuit, and what they want us to do is pay them like $5,000 or $6,000. And it's mainly in attorney's fees and all of that kind of stuff. And I said, well, okay, do you guys have a lawyer? And she said, no, because I thought I could handle it myself. Well, I kind of helped her get a lawyer who is now like being a bulldog trying to defend them. And I think eventually this lawsuit will go away.
It will go away.
But all it took was kind of deciding, okay, we're going to engage with this legal process in the correct way. Because, this lawsuit involved like a request for an injunction that this group do something. They actually did it, but the judge didn't know that because they weren't filing anything with the court because they didn't know how to. They weren't a lawyer. They weren't lawyers and they couldn't do it. So at any rate, okay, I dealt with that. My father is still alive. He's 98 at this point. And last year he kind of had a massive run-in with the facility in which he was living. And at the time I tried to help him deal with that and we got through it. But it occurred to me during the middle of that, God, this really stinks that they can do this to a 98-year-old person. And I said to myself, God, why can they do this? Well, of course, I'm a lawyer and I guess maybe I have some advantages in being involved in these things that other people don't have. But I kind of figured out, okay, there is a law out here that does allow them to do exactly what they did. And I thought to myself, is this right? And I kind of started talking to some people I knew. I tried to interest some of the legislators currently from this area in this issue. And it was this was not a hot button issue. It's not the kind of stuff you guys are talking about today. It's not abortion. It's not gun rights. It's none of that. But I talked to one person about it who said to me, there's a legislator that I've kind of been talking to for the last 4 or 5 years who's interested in doing something about that very issue. And I said to myself, God, okay, should I get involved in this? Well, I got involved in it and I helped them out. And I ended up testifying on the bill a couple times in one of our, in our legislative committees in the House and the Senate. The bill ended up passing. I don't know if the governor's going to sign it. We'll find out because our legislative session just ended and the governor's got another, 15 days or something to sign legislation or let it become law or veto it. I don't know what he's going to do with this one. But I thought to myself, okay, at the time this was happening to my father, I was really ticked off. And I figured out, my God, I should have been able to help him deal with this, but I couldn't. And I couldn't because there was a law there that it wasn't that it made these people bad people that were doing this to him, but they really shouldn't have been able to do it that way. And if the governor signs this bill, they really won't be able to do that again to anybody else. And I'm kind of proud of it. It's a very minor thing, but it's like, okay, it was one of those things where basically the people who were against this bill had to make some arguments that ended up kind of falling totally flat when people started listening to them. It was like they should be able to do this because they've always been allowed to do it. It was stuff that didn't make rational sense. And in the end, I think the legislators were kind of like, well, you shouldn't be able to do it. That's not right. And we ended up getting a lot of other people to testify, in the committees, basically saying, well, they had the same problem and there was nothing they could do about it.
So the power of a single sun and a power of a single legislator may make a big difference.
It probably will. It probably will. And it's interesting. And I think, going back to some of the professor's prior comments, I think we do need to make it clear to as many people as we can that all of the stuff going on in society, if you don't like something, figure out a constructive way of doing something. Either volunteer with a local organization, become an election observer. If you think elections are completely illegitimate, go out and see how they work. Because I got to tell you, I know how elections work. There's not a lot of fraud going on because, frankly, there are too many people involved in counting the votes. If there's a whole lot of fraud going on, somebody, one of the tens of thousands of people here in Colorado who count the votes are going to say something about that. It's not and this goes on all over the country. There are tens of thousands of people in every single state involved in counting votes. If you think they're doing something illegal, go in there and observe what they're doing. It's really easy to do. In fact, like you said earlier, you can get paid to do that. And you'll see after a while that it's really boring work and everybody is following certain rules and nobody's really committing fraud. If you think that 350 million people are committing fraud, well, okay, maybe, but I doubt it.
Well, excellent points, Bart. Quick response, Professor.
Yeah, I think that we never got around to the part that the conservative needs to hear, which is what conservatives need to hear is the constant refrain that you are not free in order to be selfish. You are free in order to be good, and you're free in order to help people who can't help themselves. And so if you're in a position where you can engage in this kind of activity, it is your moral obligation to do so. It is not your legal obligation to do so, but it is your moral obligation to do so. And too often, I think it's easy for critics to associate freedom with selfishness, but that's not the reason behind why this country put together a free system. It wasn't designed to be a free system in order to enact your vices. It was designed to be a free system so that you could live out your virtues.
Love that. Well, I kind of want to end at that, but Jake, you've been so patient the entire time. We should give you a last bite at the apple if you wish to take it. You're good? All right. You did type in, do you mind, do you still have that quote handy?
You mean the line from the Declaration of Independence?
Yeah.
So prudence indeed will dictate the governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So I just kind of think it goes back to Tootle's quote from Federalist 1. Like, you shouldn't try to completely tear down or change the system in the immediate aftermath of like one event, because if you try to do that, your decision is going to be rushed and then it will probably end up, backfiring, kind of like the Patriot Act, a quick whiplash reaction that you end up regretting later on. But like Tootle said, you should take that kind of grief that you feel in the moment, stew it over, reflect on it, and then go through the process of, okay, let me analyze everything and then let's come up with a solution.
Well, knowing that we're not going to actually solve a problem, but there are probably some things that we can do to make things better.
Wow. We have community leaders, elected officials, lawyers, and teachers. I think I'm going to vote to decide with the teachers on this one. So Jake, thank you for that ad. And thank you, Professor, for your presentation today. With that, our session is concluded. Not sure whether we're going to meet next week or not. The professor and I haven't talked, but this is an ongoing series. Please engage your community, whether it's with us or in other spheres. Thanks for being here today, everyone.